When you think about colored pencils, what you need to be remembering is that no area on your paper should be colored in with one color alone. If you look at the examples posted, the ones that really pop or stand out are the ones that have used it a great deal of value in terms of light to dark or shading, and in the case of colored pencils, back and forth blending, which you guys got a taste of last week with the value scale and the colored pencil colored wheel. But I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you would apply that to your work and some of the things about colored pencil that work and don't work. So one of the things that you would want to think through here, and if you notice this, this big dot that I have used a color that has some white in it, and you'll notice that although this was like a creamy peach color, that what it does here is it pretty much just solidifies the color, adding a little bit of the tone that was there. But if this was pure white, it won't lighten the color up. So it's important that you remember that with colored pencil, we have to go in order of lightest color to darkest color. And what that looks like then as you're shading is that you're going to start with, the lightest color and then go towards the darkest edge. Now, this is not, a great deal of time spent. But the other thing you'll see then is how you can get those darker tones, which you guys know now that you've done your value scale. But I would also encourage you to not always go for the obvious in terms of when you have colors that are light to dark. You can also now use the color theory that you've learned to not always have to add black to make a color dark at the very end. So I've started here on this leaf, and you can see I'm going back and forth, light to dark with those colors. I haven't finished this, but I wanted to show you this apple that I also started. And you'll notice that in the areas that are white, you're going to leave the paper. And this is a back and forth that I started with some yellows and some light greens, and then I've added red to the top. And then over here, there's a little bit of black, but I also used a really dark green, which is the complement of red, to do the shading on this side. So be thinking of ways that as you're doing your, your color scheme of choice for this particular piece, that if you picked a complementary color scheme for your underwater composition, you could use, for example, if you chose red and green, you could use a dark green to shade in and add value to the sides of your plant life or your fish or whatever. And again, complementary are opposites on the color wheel. So you would probably want to then also say, okay, so let's see some other complements here. I'm pulling colors. So orange and blue are complements. So you could shade with blue, or if you wanted to use violet or, purple, then you would possibly shade over some yellow. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. Again, these are not that sharp. I'm in my classroom in Arcadia right now. You guys can see I've just got a tub of whatever mixed together here. But let's just do this. Let's see if I can find a good couple of tones for you guys to see here. So we call that tone when you mix complements together. So, part of it is learning how to manage the pressure of the pencil as you're going. You can tell I'm doing it very lightly here so that the paper shows through, and then as I'm going, I'm pushing darker and darker and darker. Okay, so I'm getting a value scale just in the color yellow here. But let's just see what happens when I add violet to this side over here. And again, you would want to go really light because the darker colors just have so much more power. Okay, so again, it's a back and forth though. Let's see if we can get this to do what I want it to do. I'm also working here on a paper that has quite a bit of texture. You'll have to see what paper, what your paper does, but I don't think it's going to do what mine's doing here. I've got this like bumpy situation happening. So just for fun, I'm putting this back over the top on this side. Let's see. Sorry, I'm holding my phone, you guys. I don't have a tripod handy here. Okay, so the point is that if you were shading the side of something and you wanted it to look a little more interesting, you could mix complements. Let's just see what happens when we do this with the blue and the orange. Okay, this is probably a better example here. I don't know what was going on with that violet that I chose. But you'll notice that when you're mixing that tone, that it's not going to be a blue. Instead, it's actually creating kind of a shaded version of orange. Okay, so I think sometimes it's a matter of the colored pencils that you're using, but sometimes it's just, I don't know, that violet was kind of strange. Sargent Art Brand. Maybe that's the issue. I don't know. Okay, so that one was a bit of a struggle, but you get the point. You'll notice that that is an interesting way to shade as opposed to just throwing black on the edge. Okay, so that was the main point of this, was to talk about the layering process and the time that it takes to really accomplish a really good colored pencil versus just, you know, this whole thing. Okay, so this is kind of what I'm hoping I don't see so much of, is like, you know, these like those seaweed plants where you just like do a really big hard outline and then just go, oh, okay, well, I'm just gonna like lightly color that in. And like, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but colored pencil is definitely one where you want to shade directionally. So as you're going, let's say you're just coloring this in haphazardly, it just ends up looking distracting and kind of messy, and it definitely doesn't show like more of a realistic or 3D value. It just looks like it's been haphazardly colored in here. Whereas this up here, if you notice, my pencil strokes are rounded and they're shading directionally, right? Because I'm actually going in here and coloring according to the shape of the object. Excuse me. So yeah, so let's stay away from this. And you know, part of this lesson for your students would just be to age appropriate. Obviously, if they're little and you can get them to actually focus and color an area in, okay, great, no big deal. But if you've got someone who's in junior high or high school, then these are appropriate lessons to teach them. It's not just about composition and all of that, but it's about finishing well, and it's about spending the time. Time spent is kind of a huge deal on my classes here in Arcadia. My expectations are incredibly high of my high schoolers because I feel like students will always rise or fall to your expectation. So if your expectation is high and you show them really good examples, so you could show them the examples that we have in the book, and even if in the class, and if they're like, oh my gosh, I could never do that, you can just encourage them and say, well, don't worry about that. This is, you know, college stuff, but what do you notice about the way the colored pencil has been layered and how much time they've spent on this, you know, and that kind of thing. So you can kind of talk them into it. Okay? All right, you guys, this was fun. I hope this is helpful as you're moving through, and I'm sorry for the bouncy camera work, but I will post this under the Professor channel, and hopefully you'll get a chance to see it. So have fun with colored pencils this week.